8:35 back on the Big Boy Radio Show. You're listening to Florida Sports Talk, powered by NBC Sports. You can listen live online all the time, floridasportstalk.fm. I am Adam Reardon alongside Chris Doering. Time now to turn our attention to the biggest game of the weekend. It's inside the ACC. Been two of those. Hopefully this one has a different outcome, at least for me, and I'm sure for my good friend Danny Money of CanesInSight.com. He joins us each and every Thursday here on the show to talk Miami Hurricane football. Danny, good morning. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, man. I feel like I'm back in high school. Miami FSU week, undefeated.
That's what, you know what? It has that feel to it. Now, I was talking about it earlier this week. I'm not ready to say that, look, long term, this is back. Both these schools are going to be there forever like this. But it has that feeling to it. Now, when Miami was playing Florida State at the beginning of the season, there were two obviously undefeated teams, and the preseason rankings had them high. But at the end of the year, neither one of those teams were legit national championship contenders. Look, once you get to this point in the season, if you're undefeated, your attention is in focus has maybe changed towards a national championship, and that's what we have this weekend, the biggest matchup in college football, and it's up there in Tallahassee, Florida State versus Miami, just like the good old days.
Yeah, and the way it's shaping up really could not be better for Miami. I mean, obviously, FSU is the deeper team, the more advanced team at this stage. So that's a problem. That's not going to change. But just the way the whole week has gone, really the last 2 weeks have gone, with everybody downplaying Miami, every question that these kids getting asked about, are they really a top 10 team? Are they overrated? Can they play with FSU? And on the flip side, every question being asked to these FSU players is about how great they are and how great Jameis Winston is. So, from an intangible standpoint, a psychology standpoint, it can't shape up any better for the University of Miami. The players are the same. That's not going to change. But I really like the way the week is shaping up. If you're a Miami fan, just because of the hype.
I definitely agree. I mean, I think this is a situation where we get to see how focused this Florida State team is, and also get to see how hungry Miami is in this situation. But I do believe that there is some reason for questioning Miami recently, playing with fire, with going late into games with a North Carolina team and a Wake Forest team that are both less talented. To their credit, they found a way to pull them out. And I guess if you look back at most national championship seasons, you have some games where teams don't play as well but are able to find a way to win. Do you believe in this Miami team is one of those type teams? You think back to Ohio State from the early 2000s there, a team that played a lot of close football games but ended up winning. Are they a quality, in your opinion, team like those same types of teams in history, and what do they need to do to not continue to play with fire and leave themselves open to a late game slip up?
If you're taking the very optimistic view as a Miami fan, you think back to teams like Ohio State and Oklahoma in 2000. There's a lot of parallels between those teams in terms of how they played the year before. I believe they were both 7-6, around that range, same as University of Miami in the prior year. Then bounced back, a lot of close games, really overperformed relative to their talent level. If you look at Ohio State and Oklahoma, if they got going, they had many more talented teams than the teams that actually won the national championship. So it was just a confluence of events, luck, very good character, senior leadership, and it really just worked. So if you're taking the very, very optimistic view of this Miami team, it could be a team like that. I mean, certainly the character is there. They've shown fight. They showed fight even last year when they were really talent deficient on defense. They've done what they need to do to this point. This game, this weekend, obviously is the biggest challenge that they face, biggest challenge Coach Golden's faced since he's been here in terms of a complete team. And really it's going to take a superhuman effort from everybody. I mean, the FSU team is so balanced that you can't just say, you need to take this away or take that away. You really need to play well in all phases because they are not weak at any particular area.
Danny Money, CanesInsight.com, our guest here on the Big Boy Radio Show. Danny, one of the interesting stats from early in the year is Miami, through I think 4 or 5 games, didn't trail for a second. It was like one of only 4 or 5 schools that could claim that. And then against Georgia Tech, North Carolina, now against Wake Forest this past weekend, finding themselves in holes that they had to dig themselves out of. Any reason in particular for some of the slow starts for Miami in those ACC games?
Well, they're just not playing as well. I mean, Stephen Morris really has had a tough 2 weeks. I thought he played fine against Georgia Tech. He threw a couple of picks, but other than that, he was extremely sharp. North Carolina obviously was a disaster from Stephen Morris. It started right at the beginning, which allowed North Carolina to get the jump on Miami. Wake Forest offense came out very tentative. Defense couldn't get Wake Forest off the field. Miami, really ran only a handful of plays in the first quarter just because Wake Forest was able to control the ball so well. So, it's just a matter of a team that's not a dominant team playing very motivated conference foes. I think the first half of the season really was not a fair sample just because of some of the teams that were playing USF, Savannah State, FAU. You really can't judge too much from those teams. The ACC schedule is going to be a real representation of what this Miami team is.
The strength of this team coming into the season, obviously I know that Stephen Morris had a good offseason, but it's still about Duke Johnson, in my opinion. And yet you have not seen him maybe featured as much as he should be early in games. You look at the last two games in the fourth quarter, Miami really committed to running the football, 76% of their plays on the ground. They averaged 99.5 yards rushing in each of those quarters. And all four of their fourth quarter touchdowns came from running the football. Why doesn't Miami start to run the football earlier in the games? You talk about teams being able to control the clock. Don't you think that should be a point of emphasis earlier in the game in their game plan, perhaps?
I think you might see that this week. And, you mentioned the strength of the team being Duke Johnson. That's true, but really the biggest strength of the team is the offensive line. They're, as a pass blocking unit, I would argue that they're as good as anybody in the country. As far as teams in the top 10, they've allowed the least sacks. Their sack rate is on par with Alabama. Those are really the two top teams in terms of sack rate. And, Miami's not a dick and dunk team. They throw down the field. So it really speaks to the quality of the pass protectors on the Miami offensive line. Now, these guys are also capable of run blocking. They're huge. They're over 320, 330 almost across the board. And you've seen that in the last few weeks. Now, this game against FSU is going to be a monster challenge for that offensive line to show that they can be physical in the run blocking. That's been the criticism of the offensive line the past few years under Arquijo. Everybody knows they can pass block, but can they play to their size in the run blocking? When you look at FSU's front, guys like Jacoby McDaniel, Jernigan, these are quick, penetrating players, but small players. So will Miami's tall, big offensive line be able to get under their pads, get into these guys, and push them off the ball? That's going to be the real question as far as Miami's offense.
Danny Money, CanesInSight.com. Danny, let me ask you a question about Stephen Morris. Obviously, the ankle injury slowed him down early in the season, and then from that point on, a lot of his mistakes and a lot of the inconsistencies in him throwing the football seemed to stem from him fading backwards, not stepping into throws, maybe in fear of being injured again, having his ankle rolled up, or hit or anything along those lines. Is there anything a coaching staff can do to basically shake that mental block? To me, that's not a physical thing. It's more mentally he's kind of just scared to step into throws. And when he does feel pressure, even when there's time there's not pressure, he fades backwards on throws, lending itself to incomplete passes and or interceptions. What can the coaching staff do to kind of snap this kid out of it? Because if there's going to be a game that they're going to need a throw or two out of him, it may be this one up there in Tallahassee.
That's been a problem for the past few weeks as far as transferring weight. Really being able to push off that ankle. I've heard the ankle injury is real. It's not, it's not something that's just completely in his head. He really is having some pain with that ankle and has some trouble with that ankle. And he's a big-handed quarterback. He's kind of like Brett Favre in a way in terms of his ability to really grip the football. So when he's throwing deep down the field, he doesn't always need to have the best mechanics because he can just kind of grip it and rip it and let it go. But throws elsewhere, intermediate throws, which he struggled with since the injury, he needs to have proper mechanics, and he can't be fading back like you said. So that's a major concern. One thing Coach Golden's been emphasizing with him this week is, just be yourself. Get your personality back on the field. Have fun playing, and don't worry about these things. Don't play timid, which you saw a little bit of that against Wake Forest. I think all of that really comes from the North Carolina game. That was in front of multiple executives, multiple scouts. Really the first time for a national audience to really see Steve Morris. For to perform the way he did, I think had an effect on him mentally and really kind of got him down. So a lot of it's just about getting his swagger back, and a great first drive or first couple of drives from Miami would do wonders for getting his confidence back and getting him in rhythm. Because as we all know, he is a rhythm quarterback, and when he's on, he can really deal.
The trio of wide receivers for Florida State, Rashad Green, Kenny Shaw, and Kelvin Benjamin, remind me of some of the wide receiver cores of the great FSU teams back in the 90s. You throw in Nick O'Leary, who's the most dangerous red zone receiver in the ACC. It's a pretty lethal passing combination. How do you try to match up with those guys if you're Miami? And do you try to bring pressure on Jameis Winston? He's a guy that really handles the blitz well, but yet if you let him sit back in the pocket and have all day, it's going to be tough to cover in the secondary. What's the approach in trying to shut down that passing game?
Well, Miami's pass rush has improved quite a bit this last year. It's one of the most improved areas on the team. Tyreek McCord has made impact plays in pretty much every single ball game. Al-Quadin Muhammad, true freshman, comes in on passing downs, does a great job, very athletic. So you hope that you can get pressure with just those guys because, as you said, Jameis Winston is not your typical freshman that'll become a deer in headlights when you blitz him. He can really beat the blitz. So you hope that you can get pressure from your front four, and you got to stop the run. Really, I mean, those receivers are all dynamic across the board. Last year, FSU ran for about 219 yards. Miami only ran for 29 yards. If that continues in this game, it's going to be a blowout, and it won't have anything to do with Jameis Winston. Miami really needs to show up to the game from a physical standpoint. You saw it against Florida, where Miami really was every bit as fast as physical as Florida was for much of the game, which was the big question mark. That's what Florida made their name up. That's how Florida beat FSU so badly last year, is that speed and physicality. And Miami looked like a fast and physical team against UF. They haven't looked like that in recent weeks. And to me, that's going to be the real test against Florida State. And you'll know in the first quarter whether they're flying around and looking physical. They're not as talented as FSU on defense, not as athletic, but it's a rivalry game, and you hope to see that kind of that physical play, sound tackling, and aggressiveness from the beginning.
Danny, for a series which is basically well known for special teams, with the terms wide right being synonymous with this rivalry game, if you're the University of Miami, you feel good about your punter, you feel good about your kickoff coverage and your kickoff return team. I believe the kickoff return team #1 in the country. The major part where you may have a question mark is should this game come down to a final kick for the University of Miami. Matt Gudis, less than consistent to say the least for Miami. For Coach Al Golden and for this team, are they confident should this game come down to a kick that he can nail one?
I think he's capable. It's not a situation where you just don't have a kicker. This guy's a scholarship kicker, very sought after, coming out of high school. And he's shown the ability to make kicks. He's also been inconsistent. Missed a kick last week that he should have made. So, you don't know yet. He's a young player. He hasn't proven himself to be that kind of big-game kicker yet. He hasn't really had the chance to prove himself as that big-game kicker. So it's a big game for him. But Miami's seen kickers improve. I know when Matt Bosher was a young player, he really was very inconsistent. He ultimately became an NFL kicker, one of the better punters now in the NFL, but also a very good kicker. The Jake Weeklaw, similar situation, very inconsistent as a young player, really developed later in his career under Coach Golden. So you really don't know what you have yet with Matt Gudis.
If 22.5-point underdogs at one point in time earlier this week, if Miami's able to pull off the upset, who's the one guy we're maybe featuring and talking about the most next week when we have you on?
Duke Johnson. He's performed poorly in big games. And I don't think there's any kind of issue with him that he can't perform in these big games. He just hasn't done it yet. He struggled with turf toe during Miami's real tough stretch last year. Florida's defense really tightened up on him, made it a focus of their game plan to stop him, and honestly, they were probably the best defense in the country at the time Miami played them. So to this point, Duke has not had that signature game against a marquee opponent, and you can't ask for a better setup than FSU. And when you consider that Miami's offensive line has the ability to really push around FSU's defensive line if they're on their game, and that's Miami's best route to victory. I think if Miami wins this game, we'll be talking about Duke Johnson.
Danny, final question for you. Back in the 90s, as you mentioned, this feels like the heyday of that rivalry. It always felt personal, like these kids know each other, and they just – this is the one game they wanted to win more so than any other. This was for essentially the state title and then gave you the inside track to the national championship. Does this game still feel personal?
I think so, and I think the week and really the past 2 weeks have just added to that, because now it's a matter of disrespect. FSU's made a couple comments. Kevin Smith made a comment, just really dismissing the University of Miami. Someone mentioned that talking bad about FSU was like messing with Sasquatch, with the allusion being that FSU is Sasquatch and Miami is just some dumb camper. So it's just been a myriad of disrespect from the media and from opposing players that I think is going to motivate this Miami team and make it very personal.
Danny Money, CanesInsight.com, the best in the business, talking Miami Hurricane football. Danny, as always, appreciate your time. Enjoy the big game up there in Tallahassee, my friend, and we'll catch up with you next week and discuss all that's happened.
Take care, guys.
Appreciate it. Danny Money, CanesInsight.com. Check out the website for the latest information on Miami Hurricane football. Coming up next, we'll wrap up this edition of the Big Boy Radio Show. We'll talk a little Florida Georgia as Doering is on the road tomorrow. We'll do that next. You're listening to the Big Boy Radio Show on Florida Sports Talk, powered by NBC Sports.